Welcome to episode 4 of the Jigsaw audio commentary tracks. I'm Jacob Walton, and we are going to go ahead and do a deep look at today's episode, which is episode 4. Today's lesson, Who is Jigsaw? And I really love the thumbnail here done by Luke Hedlund of Jigsaw and in the classroom setting. And I felt this episode was really important for the Jacob character, as we can see what he's like in the classroom being a history teacher and film from that perspective. So it's one of my personal favorite episodes to do and film, and let's get right on to it. And don't forget, before we start this episode, please head over to our Patreon channel at patreon.com/thejigsaw blogs, where you can see early episodes of the commentary tracks 1 week in advance before they go out on YouTube. Having said all that, please like and subscribe if you haven't already to the channel, and let's get right into the episode. So we're really going on Halloween Day of 2017. So this is the Halloween day right after the events of 2017 Jigsaw film. And yes, I actually filmed this in one of the health classrooms at the school I work at. But yeah, it's actually really kind of cool. As I mentioned before, I am actually a gym teacher, not a history teacher, but I actually dressed up on the occasion, went to a classroom and filmed from a perspective. I asked the teacher, hey, it's okay if I come in and shoot this thing here, and they were fine with it. But yeah, so basically this is just what the Jacob character would look like in 2017. You see a little thing in the background like section 3, due Wednesday, chapter 4, Friday quiz. Yeah, my handwriting is not the best, as you can see in the background in some future videos. I have like the worst penmanship, where I don't know how people were taught like in kindergarten, first grade, how to hold their pen and pencils. I don't know if you all can't see, but how I hold my pen or pencils, like say I hold it just like this. I do the 2-finger grip and on the side. I was like, that is probably not how you're supposed to hold a pencil and write, but I digress. Having said all that, yeah, I think it was really cool to have, a setting in a classroom, because if you're saying that your character is a history teacher, I think it's kind of best to show it, because one of the things I was worried about in this series is, while this episode is called the Jigsaw Blogs, and it really is just my character Jacob talking, like put a camera on him and go, and this is another one, a monologue where I go for quite a bit of while right there. I do want an element where, you kind of want to show, don't tell, even though I would say 80% of this series right here is nothing but exposition. And some fans can appreciate that, but for the general Go audience, it'd be nice to actually show, a history teacher in an actual classroom, and that's kind of why it was important to do this episode here. And I think one of the cool concepts of this show, and it's a shame that we really don't dive back into it, because, well, for reasons, I don't want to get kids involved in this series and stuff like that, because, I am a school teacher for a living, and I don't want to get any kids involved with that. But having said that, what would happen, like, if a teacher was talking the world of Saw, and then he has to encounter kids in his classroom talking about the events, because, again, this series takes place if the Saw franchise was real. What would, junior high kids, what would high school kids who come to school the very next day, if they hear on the news that there was, Jigsaw murders happening on their TV, or if they grew up in the same city where all these Jigsaw murders are, how would kids react? And every kid's would be different. As I talked about, some kids in Halloween dressing up as the Jigsaw killer, and we had to write up some kids like that. So it'd be kind of creepy and yet inappropriate, but some kids would do that. Like, there would be kids out there that would dress up as serial killers and come to school and stuff like that and do weird things. And some kids would actually do silly things like that. And then one thing, like, you see the Jacob character talking about history right there. Kids, the very next day, they would raise their hands, say, who is Jigsaw? What is he? Why does he do what he does? And then we see the Jacob character, who actually is familiar because he's a history teacher, and he talks about, like, famous history people, amount of people, like, torture devices, like what the Romans would used to do, how the martyrs of Japan, how they would treat people. And, history is just a fun subject, and that's one of the things my character would do, where, he would talk about, he kind of relate to the John Kramer character, because John Kramer character is, a philosopher, and it's kind of a historian. And there's a running joke where Jigsaw is everything, pretty much. He's an engineer, he's a writer, he's pretty much he could do anything, as you can see in the Saw films. And someone like Jacob, who that's fascinated by the world of, famous historical killers and famous figures in history would be fascinated by someone by the likes of John Kramer. And we talk about, my own personal experience as a teacher, and I try to create, if I was a teacher, like we talk about all the skills that we mentioned, like aha moments and little things right there, and I give a little background where my character, Jacob, he actually has a teacher. Like, my mom is a history teacher in real life, my grandma was a teacher, and stuff. My stepmom was also a choir teacher. And so I grew up in a family of teachers, and I felt it was important, as a Jacob character, to be familiar with all the mannerisms of how teachers would talk and how they would act and how they would talk to the kids. And one of the cool things right here, as you see at the end of the episode, that kids, kids just aren't fascinated by what they learn in school nowadays. Some kids are, but some kids just aren't. They just want to get there throughout the day. And, you can think back to when you were in high school. Like, you remember your history teachers and stuff like that, how they impacted your lives. You may have had good teachers, you may have not had. And it's just about the relationships you have with your kids and going forward. And that's kind of what I wanted to do right here. Build that relationship and show Jacob the character as his teacher. He's compassionate. And I think it's good for him and good for the audience to see this character of Jacob, talk about, the Saw franchise, like the events of the Saw franchise that happened in real life, and how he, as a history teacher, would talk to his students in the classroom. Yeah, like this is like how he talks about, I go on about how kids, just don't ignore it, because once kids seek their attention on something, they want to talk about it the whole time. And I love the part where, Jacob talks about, kids afraid of Jigsaw because it's like the boogeyman. And it's a cool concept, what if John Kramer would be like a boogeyman for kids and how it would scare people straight. And, you can see how maybe John Kramer's methods do have an impact on the society around. Because while John, the Jigsaw killer, targets the people that he targets for the reason that don't appreciate their life, people would be scared of the Jigsaw killer, especially young children. He would scare right. I mentioned a story of like one girl talked about her dad being an alcoholic or very abusive and stuff like that. How do you justify that exactly? And I think there's a fun little drink game. You can take a drink on every Batman quote you can find here. I'm a big Batman fan, and there's a line from Batman '89. It's like, what do you suppose something like that happens to a kid, or what do you say to someone like that? That's a Batman quote. So yeah, like I say, Jacob character would tell the kid students, about the John Kramer character and stuff like that. And you'll see as we go into episode 5, there is consequences to that, and there is a little story behind that in my whole teaching career, based on personal experience. I won't get into what happened, but I'll go into more about it when we talk to episode 5. But yeah, I think it's really cool just listening to this and how, my monologue character would talk to kids and stuff like that. And I challenge you all in the comments section below. Talk about, what were some of your favorite teachers and how they impacted your lives, and what real life events did teachers do for you that help you get you through to them. It could be a traumatic event, like, I think a lot of people would mention, like his teachers, they would talk about the 9/11 attacks going up back in 2001, because that's certainly what happened to me whenever I was in school, because I was 11 years old when 9/11 happened, and then we go next year in my history class, we talk about my junior high teacher. Later when I got to junior high, I was asking, what's the history of going on? Why did people would attack us? And, some people would go to their history teachers because that's someone they would think that would know these things. Why would someone like terrorists attack the United States? You would go to like someone, rather if not your parents, you would go to like a teacher or like a history teacher, and you would ask them questions, and that's where you would learn and stuff like that. This was like before the internet and stuff like that back in my day. But that's what I would go talk to, and that's what kids would do at school, because if they're not supposed to be on their cell phones during classes, then they would actually be forced to talk to their teachers. And this is one of the fun moments I have at the end of the episode, where my character talks about one of these moments, like as a teacher, how kids would be engaged, and maybe talking about Jigsaw really kept his lesson. Maybe kids actually pay attention and learn something about Jigsaw characters. It's actually kind of cool. I love this look that I give right at the end of the camera. So guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.